what happens in terms of the kind of environments that people grow up in when they experience depression,
Mhm.
and then how that impacts maybe some of their current life situations and the depression that they face. How do you think about that?
The way I really think about that is we develop these mental models of what the world is like. And it starts somewhere, right? So it's generally with the first relationships that we have in our lives is how we think about the world, how we think about ourselves and others. Is the world safe? Can
Mm,
you trust it? Are people safe? Can you trust them?
mm,
And I think what you tend to find is while we have this great capacity to update those models with new information, new input, healthier relationships, new encounters, oftentimes without that awareness, we're still operating out of the first operating system
mm,
that actually isn't serving us very
mm.
much
Yeah.
anymore.
We're operating out of the first operating system. Um, like like you're saying, a mental model. There's a model that organizes all, like a lens, right? That organizes all of our current experience through the lens of this past experience. I think it's a hard concept for a lot of people to accept
Mm.
about themselves when they feel depressed. First of all, it feels like I'm blaming myself or I'm blaming my parents to do it. That can
Mm.
be what's hard about accepting that. Um, and so we more easily go to it's genetic. It's just a set point that I have, which is real. There are certain like levels of serotonin and levels of energy, extroversion, introversion that are very genetic and have to do with depression in some way. But that's an easier place to go to explain it. I think when someone thinks I'm depressed, they don't usually want to think it's my environment or it's how I see the world that I can't get out of. That's a really hard thing. Or so they go genetic, or they go, it's just my current job.
Mm.
It's my current relationship. It's their fault, and that
Mm.
helps me feel a little bit more secure or good about it. Um, what what do you think is difficult in terms of when you think about somebody actually being able to grow in that awareness
Mhm.
about why they're depressed, in acknowledging the ways that they've experienced the world or the ways that they've experienced early relationships? I mean, is that something that you've seen as kind of hard for people to take in or to acknowledge or to make sense of?
Yeah, because and what I really think is going on there is, if you're going to, you know, completely replace the narrative that the organizing principles of how you relate to everything, um that there's uncertainty there. What if I don't know what else I could replace that with?
Mm-hmm.
There's something about choosing familiarity over the potential for something better that is a, a very human
Yeah.
experience to have. And the way that we're talking now, like thematically, it's all focused on the self,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's this quality to depression rumination where you're just these, negative thoughts of some sort. They're usually quite personal. We can rehearse them over and over again, and usually they cause us to be very like inward focused, and then our scope of vision gets narrower. And so what I see a lot with clients that come in is, it's a lot of kind of like myopic vision. And it's almost like we can't quite broaden the
Mm-hmm.
aperture to see, what might be going right, or what else is going on in their lives. It's very narrow.
Narrow. They have like blinders on.
Mm.
They can only see themselves in that moment. It's really like tunnel vision right there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Um, you can view it as like a pair of glasses that you have on, and if those glasses were given to you at some point and you were told to wear them, and you never questioned that you should wear them,
Mm.
Something might happen where you encounter a setback. Let's say like you get let go from a job,
Mm-hmm.
and it's incredibly disappointing. Usually, people that are quite familiar with depressive cycles, they point this arrow inward
Mm.
of this is because of me. This is my fault. Those thoughts generally are not very recent.
Mm.
So what can happen is then with depression, negative thoughts, which happen, thoughts are not something we have to believe. they're a part of our
Mhm.
cognition,
Mhm.
you know, cognitive processes, they interact with emotion, etc. But I think what often happens is we rehearse them. And I think we play them on a tape.
Mm.
And, you know, when that starts to happen, I think is what makes it so difficult.
Yeah. So these are, when you say this isn't the first time they've had that thought of this is all my fault, or another common wall here is if I wasn't so bad at this, or um, or another one would be there's no way to recover from this. I
Mm,
don't know how I'm going to get out of this.
it's a big one.
And but what you're talking about when you say it's glasses or lenses, I'm kind of visually picturing them in those moments putting on the glasses that these aren't, like you're saying, this isn't the first time that they've had those glasses. In fact, it might be the only pair of glasses
Mhm.
that they've had throughout their life. And then we can start to picture, where did they get those glasses? Where did those come from? They were etched. That kind of organizing principle, or that lens, the way that it's, aberrating certain things, but also clarifying certain things to create a certain thought. It was etched early on in their life when their brains were most formed by their earliest experiences. And again, I think it's a hard thing for someone to actually like sit and hold, because they go, no, I don't want to believe that, because now I feel like I'm doing something bad by blaming my parents, or now I feel more hopeless
Mhm.
because this has always been the case. It's easier. It's something that's maybe more adaptive or more easy to soothe, to go, no, it's just this current situation. It's just this job. It's that no one's giving me a hand up. It's that I can't help myself. I need to try harder, or something like this, right? Um, how do you help somebody see the glasses that are being
Mhm.
put on? Um, I don't know. Yeah, that's
You know,
hard.
I really think it comes down to understanding how depression has been helping you.
Mhm.
And that can sound so paradoxical. Um, but if you look at it, like if we take that, that elbow that's inflamed,
Mhm.
what is the inflammation doing right there,
Mm.
right? Like what has this been doing to help you that now is hurting you? But when you can give it some compassion and understand, okay, this at some point when you were first given those glasses and you put them on, that was helping you in
Mm.
some way.
Mm.
What was it helping you with? We
Mm.
might, have to, explore together and walk through some experiences that you've had before.
Yeah, it's helped you. Like the depression, like it's interesting, you use the elbow analogy of like inflammation, where you go, oh, my back hurts, or my elbow hurts, or my knee hurts. It's inflamed, and we can get frustrated at those things, or we can go, um, there's a reason it's inflamed, and there's a reason it's causing me pain. It's creating sensitivity around the area so that I know that it needs care.
Mhm.
If I injured my muscle and my body didn't actually get inflamed or have a pain response, then where would I be? I would have no process to actually repair it. That's really interesting to think about, somebody coming in for depression as a way to be of them actually becoming sensitive to the glasses that they're wearing. They're becoming sensitive to this wound or this hurt that they have that they're looking to address.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think that's interesting. So you talk about, you wrote this article about connecting depression to awe, and you kind of talk about this experience of awe as being separate from depression, and actually something important, an important part of the depressive journey, to help somebody reconnect with something that's larger to them. Can you talk a little bit about awe, um, and what you see in terms of how does a person, I don't know, tell us about that,
Mhm.
about awe and depression.
Yeah, well, you can pick an example. Let's say we've been going with the night sky and just how, what an awe filled experience that is, particularly when it's quite rare to see that for
Hmm.
for most people, I would
Hmm.
say,
Yeah.
unless you go remote. So, there's something about that experience that starts at, the the neural, the electrical
Hmm.
level of our bodies, right?
It
where
shifts something immediately for us when we see that.
yes.
It changes something in my mind. Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
You could argue that's involuntary.
Hmm.
So, and I think part of how you can describe that shift is um, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems working in us, right?
Hmm.
You can distill that down to one system is for protection, sensing threat. You've heard the fight, flight, freeze
Hmm.
responses.
Hmm.
And then another system, you can look at it more like rest and digest. It sets us up to connect with others, to be self reflective. And so those two systems, I think what awe can precipitate is movement from one system into the other one,
Hmm.
from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic.
It's like a channel that we observe from this moment. And it's so hard to know, okay, what's causing the other? You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like, do I start to feel safe and then I start to experience awe, or do I start to experience something outside of myself, awe, and I start to feel safe? But either way,
mhm,
there's this channel switch, like tuning the channel that we can experience. Um, and typical example would be night sky, like you mentioned, or a sunset or sunrise that encounters us and pulls us for a moment out of our fear
mm,
response or our depressive response, let's say, and it pulls us out of that into some larger awareness about the world or ourselves. And can you tell us a little bit about, and we've talked about this before, but the moments that you've noticed, um, not just that happening in the night sky, let's say, but in somebody actually coming in feeling depressed,
mm,
about what those moments are that they can actually expect to encounter when they reach out for help, or when they come in feeling depressed or disconnected from themselves in therapy. What do you notice in those moments about awe, or about
mhm,
where they're looking to go, or where you as a therapist is trying to help them go?
mhm. I think there's awe in the relationship of therapy, of you're coming in, and when you're sitting with someone that is actively, seeking to understand you, you experience yourself being observed. There's an awe-inducing experience there of um, I'm not alone in this experience. Someone's experiencing it right with me,
Hmm.
that can catalyst that shift. And that's I think that's what's so incredible about relationality. Relationships is they have inherently medicinal properties. They are healing for that reason. And so I think that's what clients will experience when they come into therapy.
When you're connecting with a person, there's something already medicinal or something already awe-inspiring about that. We don't have to look at, let's say, the night sky or something way far off, or to go remote, or so to speak, or prescribe anything else. There's a moment that they and you are looking for, where they're able to connect, where they're able to somehow, through the relationship with another person,
Mhm.
see themselves something uh, awe-inspiring or awesome inside of them. Is that
Mm.
what you're meaning?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then when the two of you are joined, you can go ahead and travel,
Hmm.
right? So you're going through the train of their life, showing you what it's like to be them.
Hmm.
And you're there with them as a guide.
Hmm.
And you're sharing those
Hmm.
experiences. I think that's what makes the difference. While it is awe-inducing, let's say, to go, on a solo backpacking
Hmm.
trip, there's something there that is available when you're traveling together with someone.
That sounds really relieving. I'm picturing somebody who's had the glasses on, and throughout their whole day, there's a disconnection that they experience because of the glass, and most things are blurry to them. Something's not being perceived. Something's out of their awareness, or like blinders,
Hmm.
right? And you're talking about a moment in therapy where they experience the other person, and for a moment they can take off the glasses and they can see the broader world. I'm thinking about like a classic cinematic example of like Neo, for example, in the Matrix, of coming out of the lens that he's always seen himself in, the virtual reality that is constructed around him, to pulling away.
Hmm.
And even though there's something that can be overwhelming or difficult as he does that, as he's unplugged, there's also like a reconnection that is invigorating and that is truthful or good. I think it's really amazing to think about a relationship as a catalyst towards that kind of reconnection with the self. You're kind of setting up this idea of depression being the stance of hyper individualism,
Mm.
of somebody just totally lost within themselves, to a stance or a way of experiencing themselves as deeply connected with another person in that moment, in that exact moment, or in a larger sense of experiencing their world in that kind of way.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's almost like, you know, when eh, getting outside of yourself, I think is what, and repeatedly, is what will break that cycle of rumination. It'll break that cycle of
Mm.
hopelessness. That like inner subjective exchange. There's that common metaphor of, someone's feeling the ear of an elephant and then someone's feeling the tail.
Mm.
And they're both experiencing an elephant, but they have something to share with the other person
Mm.
about what that's like. And that can really just break some of the rigidity of like the way that we see the world and the way that we believe that it is.
Mm.
That can be so healing for
Yeah.
depression.
Yeah, totally. Something I think about when you say that is, okay, so yeah, the ear and the tail. It's funny, my cousin hosts a podcast that's called The Whole Elephant that talks about that, about this idea of we all need each other to try to reconnect or re-express or re-experience the whole picture,
Mm.
and that we do have a kind of perceptual filter on most of the time. So I think it's really amazing you use that good,
Wow,
metaphor.
that's cool.
Yeah, but it's also something where I go, that's all of us in some way. It's not just a client who's
Mm.
depressed. I think that when somebody's experiencing depression like that, they're experiencing, let's say more acutely, something that I think I'm aware of, I'm sure you're aware of the way that we experience our world is so isolating in that way, that I think we all in some way know what it's like to feel disconnected from ourselves, numb, self-blaming, um, and and I don't know. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see as some common elements that surround us, let's say in Los Angeles
Mm.
or in our culture, that are depression inducing, that are isolation inducing. What comes to your mind when you think of that?
Mm. The first thing that comes to mind is any experience that you're processing in a vacuum. So I think, I mean, a big ticket item would be social media,
Mm.
right? So there's these profound uses, and then there's this the the level of challenge it offers to our mental health
Mm.
is, something we're continuing to navigate today.
Mm.
And I think, a lot of, people that have the propensity to self blame and, that criticism, really can get a hold on them. Social media is so difficult for the comparison,
Mm.
for um, the inability to filter what you're seeing often a lot of
Mm.
the time. So I think I would name that as a big one.
Mhm.
That geographically the space of Los Angeles also oftentimes does not set itself up for a community to exist naturally. There's
Mm.
a lot of, things that people do to cultivate community, but the way in which it's structured, it can be really hard to find like-minded people to connect with.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think both those things are really, when I think about the geographical piece, I think freeways
Hmm.
of what emotionally, what do freeways do? And socially, what do freeways do? They create, I mean, if that was a brain in the freeways were your white matter, in your community spaces like parks and things where your gray matter, you'd be uh, like an autistic brain. You'd be
Mm.
one that is totally overdeveloped and no actual processing going on. There's something like that that happens, I think, that's what, at least the picture that I have when I hold like a city in mind, is I go, when you talk about freeways, you're talking about people constantly moving back and forth. And what that does is it takes you literally out of your own community and places you in one that's disconnected from the people and places that matter to you. And then you're supposed to be over here most of your time. And then you spend very little time in the places and people that matter to you. So what happens to our identity in those kind of situations?
Mm.
What happens to our sense of being observed or being known when I have to switch places in my mind every time I move somewhere? It means something, right? To go to a grocery store and to see your familiar cashier, or to go to a park and see the same families or parents or people playing basketball that you always see, and they can wave to you. That is pulling you out of yourself or out of your glasses, let's say, into a real connection with another person. And I think that kind of, those loose connections, I think we need like thousands of them
Mm-hmm.
to feel like I know who I am and I know what my role is, my purpose is. To feel some kind of awe generally about our life. I think we have to have moments like that, or deep connections like that. With the social media piece, I think about the not just the isolation of literally, if you look at somebody and they're just looking at their phone, right? That's an obvious picture. But then you think about what Jonathan Haidt talks about is what's the experience blocker. You
Mm.
know, like it's actually keeping me from doing those things like going to the park. Why go out to a bowling alley? Why go out even to a movie theater when I can entertain myself here and I don't have to move at all? I don't have to cross over that threshold of anxiety. I also don't have to take off my glasses. I don't have to get outside of myself at all. I can just sit here at home, and I'm just totally comfortable. I don't have to pay attention. If we are to get rid of the phone and you're just be at home, if let's say there's no screens in your house, right? And you're sit at home alone most nights, you'd be like, okay, I got to go do something. You'd feel
Mm.
lonely.
Mm-hmm.
You'd feel depressed. You'd feel your sense of like, I don't like this. You'd feel something off inside, and you'd have a compulsion to go move somewhere and to connect with something. But I worry about that. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've thought about that at all, but I worry about that experience. If we're always satiating that,
Mm-hmm.
if we're always blinding ourselves from that longing to connect, then what happens? Where are we left?
Mm-hmm. This is why I think recognizing the nuance of emotional experiences comes real in handy because, oftentimes we can discount something like an experience like boredom as something, well, how much more enhances our quality of life to kind of short circuit that.
Hmm.
But actually, there's a function to boredom, right? And it can be that um, that shifting that we need to
Hmm.
move ourselves into something
Hmm.
that's more, more satisfying in a sustainable, relational way.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, so you talk about this. I can't pronounce it. What's the model's name that you mentioned? It's like this domino kind of
Oh,
model, or this kind of progressive model that talks about how an initial physiological change leads to like a real change. Can you
yeah.
talk about that? Because I think when somebody talks about like, okay, let's say they come in, just to come back to this moment of they come in and they can actually recognize something in themselves. Maybe they start talking about their depression and they see something in a new way. Um, Give us a picture there of like the hopefulness of why that is actually the most important place to start for a person for the change that they need.
Mm. The Maruaushka model is what you're referring to.
Madawaska. Okay.
Yeah. um, I believe it has its origins in the Russian doll
Okay.
that's built.
Yeah.
So I guess essentially what it's doing is it's providing like a framework for. We talked about the shift with, like our neurology, right, and our physiology, and what that can. As you continue, what that helps to influence is our thought patterns. So we don't have to believe everything we think. And so, experiences of awe when we have like deeply entrenched thought patterns of, you were mentioning some beliefs earlier of like, it's completely hopeless.
Mhm.
There's no point, right? The way in which awe can counteract some of that, and allow for new experiences to kind of filter in that compete that kind of, um, can quell some of the noise of those, I think is this really beautiful thing that's able to happen. And
Hmm.
ultimately, when you do that enough, when you run that way enough, when you're allowing experiences of awe, let's again get it right. It's not these like profound travel experiences. It's really learning how to notice and see
Hmm.
what's around us. The more we're kind of gaining access and attuning to that and our capacity for that, then we start seeing things like our worldviews
Hmm.
start to change.
Hmm.
Then we start seeing, our attitudes around the world and what we think of it, what we think of ourselves. Those really difficult things to shift. We start seeing movement
Hmm.
there.
So it's kind of like a domino situation, huh? It's like
Yeah.
one thing kind of leads to another. You start with this little moment, and it's so helpful to know it's like that's actually the catalyst. That's actually the domino situation that leads to these physiological changes in our brain to be able to, like you said, compete
Mm.
for how I'm going to make sense of this situation, or compete for how I'm going to behave or how I'm going to feel in this situation. That can lead to a change, like an attitude or a way of acting or some kind of initiative inside that was lost before. I think you're exactly right that the process of therapy with depression has a lot to do with awe, in the sense that it opens, a person is looking to open up so much more of themselves that has been closed off, and that's what therapy is about. It's going from this smaller picture of who I am or who I know myself to be, to seeing something larger in myself that has been
Mm.
disconnected or cut off. Um, but not just larger within myself, but maybe larger within the world. The world is bigger, or other people are more available. There's a night sky out there. That kind of experience is, I think, core to what you're talking about. That,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I might add to that as well is how much people want that.
Mm.
We don't want to be thinking about ourselves all the time,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's gratifying or detrimental to us. We don't want that. We want to be ourselves and freed up to join what else is going on.
Mm.
And I really think awe can inspire a lot of that.